We are talking about rejection today. And our scripture comes from First Peter 2, 4, and 5. And it reads, as you come to him, a living stone, rejected by people, but chosen and honored by God. You yourselves, as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built to be a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Hands up or thumbs up if you enjoy being told no. Hands up or thumbs up if you enjoy being left out of your favorite activities. Exactly. So I don't know anyone who likes to be told no, nor do I know anyone who likes being overlooked. Rejection is painful. Rejection causes psychological wounds such as emotional pain, anger and aggression, and lowered self esteem. But first, before we get too deep, let's talk about the word rejection. So, rejection is the act of not accepting, believing, or considering something or someone. The act of not accepting, believing, or considering something or someone. Now, there's many situations in which we can be rejected. The most common, though, are family relationships, romantic relationships, and social relationships. All of them are equally hurtful. I can't say that one is worse than the other. Rejection causes us to not trust people, to not speak out, to not be bold. It can also cause us to do some crazy things like that aggression and that anger I mentioned a few seconds ago. I have to share this story with you from the Bible. I've told you guys before how much I love the stories from the Bible, a lot of the stories from the Bible, um, because, for one, they're very relevant to today, which allows me at least to learn a lot from them. And two, they're good. I think that a lot of the stories in the Bible, they're good. They're like a TV show or a movie. The story I want to tell you about is Leah. So if you already know this story, I'm sorry, but I wanted to share it for those who aren't familiar with it. And did I mention that it was good? The story starts at Genesis 29 and 16. So I don't know if you want to follow along, but I'll make some references to different um, verses as I'm going along. So we're starting at Genesis 29 and 16. So we have Leah and Rachel, they're sisters. Leah is the oldest. In verse 17, it describes the girls. And the way it describes it is it says that Leah had tender eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. So basically, Rachel's beautiful and Leah's not. Leah's, she might be a little hard on the eyes, a little bit. So Jacob, he has fallen in love with Rachel and he wants to marry her, like with his everything. He loves him some Rachel. But the girl's dad told him that he had to work for him. So Jacob has to work for the dad for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So Jacob was like, cool, I'll do it. So he worked for 7 years. And so in these times, back in these times, the bride would go into a dark room where the groom was, and she would have a veil on covering her face. So Jacob's worked his 7 years for the girl's dad. He believes he's going to marry his dream girl, Rachel. So the bride goes into this dark room. She has this veil on. The day after, when they wake up, Jacob wakes up and finds out that he did not marry Leah. I mean, he did not marry Rachel. Instead, he married Leah. So needless to say, he was not happy. So again, the room is dark. So he didn't know. He was in there consummating his marriage. And next thing you know, the next morning, he realized that it wasn't the girl that he thought it was. So Jacob goes back to the girl's dad and he's expressing his anger. I can imagine him being pretty upset. So the dad was like, all right, for real this time. If you promise to work for me for 7 more years, I'm gonna give you Rachel for real. Like I tricked you the last time, but I'm gonna give you Rachel for real this time. So again, back in this time, they had luncheons, dinners, celebrations for a week, and that was considered the wedding week. So at the end of the wedding week, um, this is after he married Leah unknowingly. So they had their little celebration for the week, and at the end of the week, the dad decided to let Jacob marry Rachel. So um, in verse 31, we learn that because Leah had been rejected by Jacob, basically the rejection came from her looks. He didn't love her because of how she looked. But God made it so that Leah was the one that was able to have the children and Rachel was not. In my studying for this, in my commentary, they called it the law of divine compensation. And that means that people who lack in one area are given extra in another area. And I thought that was pretty powerful. And I had never heard it called that. But I've heard it when it comes to like people's senses. So like if a person is blind, then normally they can hear better than most of us because they're lacking in that one sense. So again, it's called the law of divine compensation. So although Leah was not the most beautiful, she was the one who was able to give her husband children, and Rachel was not. When we feel like all hope is lost because we are being cast aside, we have to know that God has our back and he's going to see that we come out all right. So, part 2 of the story. Part 2 is from verses 31 to 35. Now, Leah's having these children for Jacob, and they're all sons. And we all know how important sons are back in those days. If you had a son, you were like the best thing ever. So she's having these sons. Leah names her first son that she has, she names him Reuben. And Reuben means the Lord has seen my affliction. She names her second son Simeon, which means the Lord heard that I am unloved. Leah names her third son Levi, which means my husband will become attached to me. So let's pause here. What's the common theme here with these boys' names? Leah is focused here, even in naming her sons, her focus is on her and the way she's being treated by Jacob. So she's not thinking about anything else. She's just like, this man is treating me this way. He's rejecting me, but I still have hope. I'm still trying to see what I can do to get him to love me. So when Leah finally has her fourth son, she names him Judah, which means praise. So at this point, the message here is that Leah realizes that God is the reason for her to be able to have these children, despite how her husband feels about her. She also realizes that God is the one who deserves her devotion, not this man who is essentially paying her no attention except to conceive these children. All right, so let's go on to part 3 of the story. This is the final part. So part 3, which is chapter 30 of Genesis, which we're not going to read, or I'm not going to talk about in great detail, but just know that Rachel is definitely feeling some type of way because Leah's having all these male children. Rachel, because she's in her feelings, she allows Jacob to sleep with her servant in order to get their son. Then Leah feels outdone, so she allows her servant to sleep with Jacob to get them some more sons. Now, please understand that God did not condone any of those behaviors, but he did give them, like he does us, he gives them free will. And so this is what they chose to do. This is how they chose to handle this. I'm gonna call it some drama. So the message here that we need to get is that in the midst of all this craziness going on, Leah realized that God did care about her, even though her circumstances didn't change. They actually, to me, got worse. And so the greatest reward is that Jesus was born out of this line of rejection, the rejection that Leah faced from Jacob. So real quick, we looked at this before. Can you guys see that? The family line of Jesus. So I just wanted to show this again so we can kind of have a visual of where all this craziness went down. So we're up here let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. With Jacob. So here's Jacob with Leah and Rachel, his wives and their children, and then, they doing the most up here. So here is where, and you can barely see it, right here where Judah is born, and that's the son that Leah had with Jacob. So they had Judah, and then if you follow it along, you can see that Rahab was actually a descendant of Judah, and then follows along, and you can see that again, Jesus is a direct descendant of Judah. So even though Leah was rejected, she was treated horribly, she wasn't loved by Jacob as his wife, God still allowed her to create something wonderful, something amazing. How do you continue to move as a person, as a human being? How do we continue to move through the rejection? How can we accept rejection? Because the title is an oxymoron, to accept rejection. And most of us struggle with that. When we're rejected, we get in our feelings, we feel whatever type of way. But we need to learn to accept this rejection. So I want to give you 3 ways that we can work on this, that we can try to make this happen. So the first way for us to accept rejection is to focus on God. Like Leah, we tend to focus on the person who rejected us and the way that they treated us. Instead, we need to focus on God and what his word says about you. So if, I don't know if you guys remember the scripture we used last week, but it was from Song of Songs 4 and 7. And it said, "You are absolutely beautiful, my darling. There is no imperfection in you." This is your identity, not the things that you were told or the way you were made to feel through that rejection. So again, we need to focus on God. The second way that we can work through the rejection is to know your worth. When Leah had her first 3 sons, she was trying to get her husband's attention and trying to make him love her more. Once she realized who truly deserved her devotion, her mindset shifted. She realized how worthy and deserving she was to God. How we see ourselves determines how we treat ourselves, which determines how we allow others to treat us. So know your worth. The third and final way that we can work through this thing, how we can accept rejection, is to not give up. Don't give up. Because sometimes when things don't change or get better immediately, we begin to question God. And Leah probably felt overwhelmed. She probably felt foolish while she was going through all that she did with her husband and her sister. But when it was all said and done, Jesus came through her son Judah's lineage. Jesus was born through the tribe of praise. So even when it seems like things are out of control, there's no control and it's just pure craziness, we have to know that the Lord, in the end, he's going to make it right. We might not be able to, but he can. So don't give up. Even though you've been rejected, you've been cast aside, left alone, messed up, you have your flaws, you have failures, defects, whatever you have going, God still has an awesome plan for your life. Do not allow these things to defeat you, the flaws and the failures and all that stuff. Don't allow those things to defeat you. We have to accept the rejection and continue living knowing that we are being built by God for his purpose.